Hi, Studio Recapped here. Today, we're going to talk about a movie called Shutter Island, a 2010 thriller mystery. Spoiler alert is on. Take care. Teddy Daniels, along with his new partner Chuck, heads to Shutter Island for an important mission. On the way to the island, Teddy feels unwell due to seasickness and starts chatting with Chuck. When Chuck asks if he has a girlfriend, Teddy shares that he lost his wife in a fire while he was away at work. The building they lived in burned down, leaving him devastated. As Teddy realizes he's misplaced his cigarettes, he borrows one from Chuck, and they talk about a Sheckliffe hospital, the psychiatric facility for criminally insane patients they are heading to. The island is surrounded by cliffs, with the only way in or out being a dock. Once they arrive, the marshals are escorted by armed guards to the hospital. Along the way, they notice electric fences encircling the facility. Upon arrival, they are asked to surrender their firearms. Teddy and Chuck initially resist but eventually comply when they realize they won't be allowed inside otherwise. According to the guard, the hospital is divided into 3 buildings. Building A houses male patients, Building B is for female patients, and Building C is reserved for high-risk patients. These are the most dangerous criminals, and access to Building C is strictly forbidden without written permission and the presence of guards and Dr. Colley. As soon as they enter the hospital, the psychiatric patients give Teddy strange, unsettling looks. The marshals meet with Dr. Colley. Noticing violent drawings on the wall, Teddy asks the doctor about them. Dr. Colley explains that these artworks are carefully created and depict the kinds of torment these patients endured in the past. They were nailed in the head, beaten, and treated with extreme cruelty. But here, he adds, we feed them, talk to them, and provide them a peaceful life. Teddy argues that these patients have harmed and killed people, so they don't deserve such treatment. However, Dr. Colley refrains from judging his patients and is solely focused on their rehabilitation. The 2 marshals are at the hospital to investigate the escape of a prisoner named Rachel Solando. Rachel killed all 3 of her children, drowning them one by one in the lake behind her house by holding their heads underwater until they died. Afterward, she brought their bodies into the kitchen, sat them around the table, and ate with them. Rachel's husband is dead, making her a war widow. During her time at the hospital, she has never admitted to what she did. Hearing this story triggers strange and disturbing images in Teddy's mind, causing him to experience a headache. Dr. Colley gives him some aspirin to help. Rachel believes her children are still alive and living at home, and even after 4 years, she hasn't accepted that she's in a hospital. Rachel's escape is a highly puzzling case. The night before, she was returned to her room after a therapy session, and the door was locked behind her. Additionally, the only window in her room had bars on it, making escape seemingly impossible. The marshals inspect Rachel's room. Based on their findings, she must have fled barefoot, as both pairs of her shoes were still in the room. Teddy discovers a piece of paper hidden under one of the tiles in her room. Written on it are the words, "The Law of 4, who is 67." This cryptic message surprises everyone and leaves Teddy intrigued by the mystery. Teddy requests access to the personal records of all the hospital staff, but Dr. Colley denies his request. Teddy insists, and as a compromise, a meeting is arranged after dinner for him to speak with the hospital staff. Given the strong current surrounding the island, Rachel's chances of surviving if she escaped are slim. Teddy notices a lighthouse in the distance and asks a guard about it. The guard explains that it's used for the island's sewage treatment system. During the meeting with the hospital staff, the marshals learn that one of the guards left his post for a few minutes to use the restroom. Teddy questions the group therapy session Rachel attended the night before her disappearance and takes notes on the details. He also learns that Dr. Sheehan, who led that session, is currently off the island on leave. They attempt to contact him but are unsuccessful. After dinner, Teddy and Chuck meet with Dr. Colley again. During this time, the film shows flashes of Teddy's memories from his time in World War II. Dr. Colley introduces them to Dr. Nearing, the head of a Sheckliffe hospital, who conducts studies on the patients. The conversation between Teddy and Dr. Nearing becomes tense. with the doctor accusing marshals of being violent men with heightened defense mechanisms. Teddy counters by saying, "You've never seen a camp full of dead bodies, but I have. I was there." Teddy then demands access to the hospital's records, but when Nearing refuses, Teddy declares that their work is done and says they'll leave the island after filing their report. Later that night, as Chuck asks Teddy about their decision to leave, he realizes Teddy was bluffing. Teddy finds everything at the hospital strange and suspects no one is telling the truth. That night, Teddy dreams of his wife, Dolores. In the dream, she warns him, "Rachel is still here, and you must not leave." When Teddy wakes up, he discovers a violent storm has hit the island, preventing any boats from coming or leaving. The next day, Teddy asks Dr. Colley if he can speak with patients who attended a therapy session with Rachel. Teddy interviews several patients, asking them questions about Rachel. During one interrogation, he uses a patient's obsessive habit of scribbling with a pencil to provoke him, and the patient is taken away. He then speaks to another patient, Mrs. Kearns, who appears more stable. She is in the hospital for killing her husband with an axe. When Teddy asks her about Rachel, she repeats the same vague details as the others. Teddy shifts his questioning, asking if Dr. Sheehan is a good man. She confirms this but, in fear, writes run in Teddy's notebook before their conversation ends. Teddy asks all the patients he interviews about a man named Andrew Leedis, but none of them know anything about him. After these conversations, Teddy becomes more convinced that strange and sinister things are happening at the hospital. Chuck also asks Teddy about Andrew Leedis. Andrew Leedis was the maintenance worker of the building where Teddy and his wife lived. He started the fire that killed Dolores and then disappeared. Teddy explains, "A few years ago, while reading the newspaper, I saw his photo. He had set a school on fire, been sent to prison, and then transferred to this hospital." Teddy is certain that if Leedis is still alive, he must be in Building C. The fierce storm and howling winds terrify Teddy and Chuck, forcing them to seek shelter. Chuck asks Teddy what he plans to do if he finds Leedis. Teddy insists he doesn't intend to kill him. He recounts memories from World War II, describing a moment when soldiers surrendered and handed over their weapons. Despite this, Teddy and his fellow soldiers lined them up and executed them all. That wasn't war, Teddy says. It was a crime. And I'm tired of killing. Teddy reveals that after Leedis disappeared, he started investigating a Sheckliffe. He discovered that the facility's funding comes from the Committee on Un-American Activities and believes people here are too afraid to speak out. Teddy is convinced the hospital conducts mind-altering experiments. He recalls meeting a man named George Noyes, a former patient of a Sheckliffe. George had agreed to let the hospital perform experiments on him in exchange for money, but the tests left him seeing hallucinations of dragons. After being released, George murdered several people and begged the court not to send him back to the hospital. The judge sent him to Dedham Prison instead. Teddy explains that George's testimony solidified his belief that a Sheckliffe experiments on people. "I went to Warsaw, things like this wouldn't happen," he says. "But right here, they're playing with people's lives like it's nothing." Teddy admits his true mission is to gather evidence and expose the hospital's activities. Chuck agrees, saying, "Everything here reeks of illegal operations. They wanted you to come here. We came for Rachel's disappearance, but there's no proof she even exists." Chuck speculates that while Teddy was investigating a Sheckliffe, someone discovered his trail and orchestrated this plan to lure him to the island. Just as Teddy says they need to escape, guards find them. Back at the hospital, the marshals change out of their wet clothes. A staff member provides them with uniforms and cigarettes. Teddy interrupts a staff meeting, confronting Dr. Colley about the note found in Rachel's room. The hospital has 66 patients in total, but the note suggests there's a mysterious 67th patient. Dr. Colley informs Teddy that Rachel has been found. Teddy and Chuck meet Rachel. She initially seems surprised to see them and embraces Teddy, mistaking him for her husband. Then she abruptly remembers her husband is dead and attacks Teddy, demanding to know who he is. After leaving Rachel's room, Teddy suffers a severe migraine. Dr. Colley gives him medication, and he's escorted to the nurse's lounge to rest. Teddy has a disturbing dream of frozen corpses lying together, including Rachel and a little girl. The girl accuses him, "You should have saved me." Teddy then sees a man resembling Andrew Leedus lighting a cigarette with a match. The figure morphs into Chuck, who warns him, "We're running out of time." Suddenly, Rachel appears, her face covered in blood, standing over 3 dead bodies at her feet. She pleads with Teddy to help her, and he begins lifting the corpses and throwing them into water. As he stares at their faces, he wakes up in a panic, only to find himself face to face with his wife, Dolores, again. Teddy, still dreaming, sees Dolores drenched in water, telling him, "Leedus isn't dead. He's here, and you have to find him and kill him." Startled, he wakes up to loud noises. Chuck lights him a cigarette, explaining that the backup generator has failed, throwing the facility into chaos. The two step outside, noticing that all electronic and security systems are down, and decide to use the opportunity to enter Building C in search of Andrew Leedus. Inside Building C, Teddy gets into a fight with a deranged inmate who shouts, "None of us want to stay here." Teddy violently subdues the man, and Chuck, along with a guard, escorts the inmate to the medical ward. Teddy spots a room with a man inside who cryptically says, "You've lied to me so much. I don't belong to myself anymore, I belong to them." Teddy recognizes him as George Noyce, who accuses Teddy of being the reason he's stuck in a shecklif. George reveals, "They know everything. You're the reason I can't leave. And Chuck? He's not with you. You came here alone, and now they've won." George warns Teddy, "They'll take me to the lighthouse and drill into my brain." He points out that Dolores is dead and urges Teddy to let her go, saying, "You can't both kill Leedus and learn the truth. You have to choose, let her go or she'll destroy you." Teddy refuses, to which George responds, "Then you'll never leave this place." George adds, "Leedus can only be in the lighthouse." Teddy reunites with Chuck, who shows him a form for patient 67. Suspicious of Chuck, Teddy keeps quiet and decides to split up, heading for the lighthouse on his own. As he nears the shoreline, he notices the rising tide and retreats, only to discover that Chuck is missing. While searching for Chuck, Teddy climbs down a rocky cliff, encountering swarms of rats. Pushing through, he finds a hidden cave where a woman is hiding. She reveals herself as the real Rachel Solando, clarifying that she never had children and was a doctor at a shecklif before being institutionalized. Rachel explains, "I started questioning the drugs and surgeries. They're performing lobotomies, inducing seizures through electroshock therapy, and experimenting on the brain to create obedient, emotionless humans." Rachel tells Teddy, "You're not leaving this place." She describes how his migraines, nightmares, aspirin, cigarettes, and even the food are all laced with drugs designed to manipulate him. She warns that within 36 to 48 hours, his body will start trembling uncontrollably. Rachel accuses the hospital staff of conducting Nazi-like experiments, removing parts of patients' brains to observe the effects and create a new kind of person. On his way back, Teddy gets into a guard's car. The guard talks about how violence is inherent in God's nature and how it has been embedded in his creations, claiming that inner peace doesn't exist and everything boils down to violence. Teddy denies being violent, but the guard stubbornly disagrees, stating, "I know you well." When Teddy arrives at the hospital, Dr. Coley informs him about the previous day's events. A mysterious person attacked one patient and spoke with another for a long time. Teddy says they should leave since they've reached their goal, but Dr. Coley replies that Teddy isn't cooperating and is only there for other reasons. Teddy attempts to escape. When Dr. Naring tries to sedate him with a syringe, Teddy fights back. Dr. Naring tells him that he's alone on the island. Teddy injects the syringe into Dr. Naring's arm, then searches for Chuck, believing that the lighthouse is the only place he could be. To prove to Dr. Coley that his wife is dead, Teddy sets fire to Dr. Coley's car using a tie his wife had given him. Teddy makes his way to the lighthouse, where he gets into a fight with one of the guards, knocking him out. Inside, he finds empty rooms, and eventually, he reaches Dr. Coley. Teddy's hand shakes more as his hallucinations intensify, and he sees his wife again, urging him to leave the island. Dr. Coley tells Teddy that his hallucinations are far worse than they had anticipated. He explains that Teddy has been undergoing treatment for depression and they had been giving him medication over the past 24 hours. Dr. Coley reveals that Teddy has been a patient at the institution for 2 years. Teddy refuses to believe he's insane, declaring, "I'm U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels." Dr. Coley informs him that patient 67's form is actually Teddy's own, and the names of Andrew Leedis, Teddy Daniels, Rachel Solando, and Dolores Channel all share the same letters. In truth, Rachel and Teddy are creations of his mind, and his real name is Andrew Leedis. He has been searching for himself all along. Dr. Coley continues, saying that 24 months ago, Andrew was brought to the institution by court order, unable to accept his crime, so he created a different persona and blamed others. He fabricated a story in which he was the hero, not the murderer. "I wish I could let you live in your own world, but you're violent and trained to be that way. In fact, you're the most dangerous patient here." Dr. Coley gives Andrew a transcript of his conversation with him, revealing that the medical team has been manipulating his brain to prevent him from causing harm to others. It is at this moment that Andrew realizes Chuck has been his psychiatrist, not his colleague. All of this was orchestrated by Dr. Coley to make Andrew accept his guilt. Dr. Coley has been taking care of Andrew to prevent harm from coming to anyone. Dr. Coley says, "I swore to try and help you without resorting to procedures, to show you how impossible your thoughts are, but I failed." Andrew picks up a gun and points it at them, but it's not real. Everyone tries to tell him the truth, but Andrew refuses to accept it. Andrew even denies having children, but Dr. Coley tells him that his wife drowned their 3 children in the lake near their cottage. He sees a photo of his daughter and recalls the day he returned home to find his wife sitting on the swing, but there was no sound of children. He sees his kids drowned in the water and retrieves their bodies. His wife asks him to let her go, and as he holds her, he shoots her, killing her. When Andrew regains consciousness, he accepts his illness and admits to killing his wife. Unable to face his guilt, he created alternate personas. Dolores had once told Andrew that she felt an insect in her brain, stimulating her nerves. Andrew indirectly caused the death of his children because he didn't help his wife. Dr. Coley says, "You remembered your guilt once before and accepted it, but after a while, you reverted to your old self." Dr. Coley helped Andrew and didn't leave him, unlike everyone else. In the final scene, Andrew has reverted to his old self, thinking he's Marshal Teddy. In truth, Andrew has accepted his guilt but cannot decide what to do. He wants to leave the island. He asks his psychiatrist, which is worse, to live as a monster or die as a good man? He then walks toward the lighthouse to undergo the brain procedure.